Hi, I'm Nicholas Revelis, the Geisel Director of Education and Outreach for San Diego Opera, but you could call me Dr. Nick. I'm sure that some teacher at one time in your academic career so far has said to you or to your class, you must read this book. It's a classic book and everyone should read it. Maybe for those of you who are younger, it's Charlotte's Web, Green Eggs and Ham, or Where the Wild Things Are. Maybe it's the Harry Potter series or The Secret Garden, The Hunger Games. In high school, I'm sure a teacher has insisted that you read The Diary of Anne Frank, The Lord of the Flies, The Outsiders, or maybe even big classic books like Moby Dick or The Scarlet Letter. In my day, one of the classic books that we were encouraged to read, and it certainly is still considered a great book, is Miguel Cervantes' Don Quixote. The main character of this book has been treated in art, statuary, movies, ballet, and opera. He's one of the great characters of world literature, all stemming from this long, complicated novel that was first published in 1605. It's a huge, huge work that relates the many adventures of this elderly gentleman who went a little mad reading too many books about the age of chivalry. He soon goes completely off the deep end, considering himself to be living in a world long past, the world of knights, ladies in distress, dragons, and princesses. He fashions his own homemade armor, renames his old sick horse, Rocinante, invites his simple neighbor Sancho to be his servant, and off they go in search of adventure to slay dragons and free beautiful women from the danger that always seems to surround them. A local farm girl, pretty but simple, is dubbed Dulcinea, and she becomes the object of Don Quixote's affections, the one for whom he's enduring all these adventures. The adventures? Well, there's one after another, and they all involve the fact that the Don is in his own private medieval world, while everybody else around him has to deal somehow with his hallucinations. In one case, he and Sancho come to a roadside inn, and Quixote sees it as a castle, and its innkeeper as the lord of the manor. He follows the innkeeper around all night, asking him to be knighted, and in fact, like the knights of old, Quixote spends the entire evening into dawn kneeling in prayer, the traditional vigil before becoming a knight. The innkeeper finally dubs him just to get rid of him. In another famous adventure, he and Sancho come upon some windmills, their big winged arms turning slowly in the breeze. Quixote imagines that they're monsters, giants daring to threaten his beloved Dulcinea. So he takes his makeshift lance and he attacks the windmills over and over again, an action that unfortunately backfires terribly. The best word to describe the novel Don Quixote is bittersweet. It has moments of comedy and action, but it also has moments of sadness and hard doses of reality as Quixote eventually re-enters the real world. At the end of the book, he dies quietly, surrounded by his family and La Mancha, finally having been brought back to reality and with no more adventures to enjoy. The opera based on this wonderful story is Don Quixote, the French name of our character, because a French composer wrote the opera, Jules Massenet. Massenet wrote the opera in 1910 for the Opéra de Monte Carlo in Monaco, one of 5 operas that he wrote for that theater. And he wrote it as a vehicle for the greatest Russian bass living at the time, Fyodor Shaliapin. Massenet thought that the bass voice, the lowest of the male voice types, would be perfect for Don Quixote because basses were always considered either villains because of the deep dark color of their voice, or as humorous characters in comedies, such as the impatient but forgiving father or an old doctor in love with a woman young enough to be his daughter. Because Quixote's story involves the bitter and the sweet, a little comedy, a little tragedy, the bass voice suits the character perfectly. And because Quixote is so desperately in love with Dulcinea, it gives the bass the opportunity to sing some romantic music, some love music, something an operatic bass doesn't get the chance to do very often. The role of Dulcinea is given to a mezzo-soprano, a lower female voice. This is the voice type used by the composer Georges Bizet for another famous Spanish opera, Carmen. Composers of opera in the 19th century felt that the texture and color of the mezzo-soprano voice was much sexier, earthier than a soprano voice, and seemed to fit characters like Dulcinea and Carmen perfectly. Dulcinea gets to sing music that sounds typically Spanish, even though the composer was definitely a Frenchman. For some reason, French composers have an uncanny ability to write fake Spanish music and make us feel like we're right there in Madrid or Seville or La Mancha, eating paella and drinking sangria. Well, I'll drink the sangria. We'll give you some fruit punch. The opera, of course, can't possibly cover the entire novel and all of the exploits of Don Quixote. That would probably take a couple of years of our time in the theater. But the opera does cover our introduction to Quixote, his first stammering serenade to Dulcinea, and the famous battle with the windmills, a spectacular sequence that you will not soon forget. How does a composer of an opera tell a story just through music? Well, let's use Jules Massenet and his opera Don Quixote as an example. The first thing that probably goes through a composer's mind is to ask himself this question: what is the story about? He might also ask, where is this story happening? When is this story happening? And who is this story happening to? It may seem kind of obvious, but the what, where, who, and why questions really need to be answered by a composer before he can sit down and write a note of music. The answers to those questions will give the composer all sorts of clues to be able to come up with music to fit the story. The where of Don Quixote is kind of easy, right? Where does it take place? Takes place in Spain, and the first scene is set in the plaza of a little village or town where Don Quixote is going to make his first appearance. When is this story taking place? Probably sometime in the early 16th century, because that's when Miguel Cervantes' book was written, around 1500. So the people in the village are going to be dressed like Spanish villagers dressed at that time. Who is the story happening to? Well, overall, the story is happening to our hero, Don Quixote. But in this first scene, we've got to establish some things before Quixote shows up. Let me read you the stage instructions for this first scene. Spain, a festival, a public square. On the left, an inn. On the right, the house of the lovely Dulcinea, a happy and animated crowd singing, dancing, and making merry. Well, that gives us a lot of information, doesn't it? We're in Spain, we're in the middle of a kind of fiesta or village celebration where people are having a good time, singing, dancing. You notice probably that reference was made to Dulcinea's house, and we know that the woman that Don Quixote is going to fall in love with and go out into the country to find adventure in order to prove his love for her is this Dulcinea. As a composer, that's all that Massenet needed. Spain, party, people, singing, dancing. So what are some of the words that come to your mind right off the bat to describe the kind of music that he needs to write in order to communicate what's going on? I'll give you a minute to think about it. In fact, if your teacher wants to stop the video right now and get your ideas, that'd be terrific. Then when you come back to the video, I'll give you my impressions, okay? I'll give you a couple of minutes. Are you back? Okay, here's what I think. For this opening scene, the music needs to be fast, happy, up, dancey, whirling, bustling, all the things that music is very capable of doing. Where here's the music. Let's listen to it and see if your ideas matched the composer's ideas for the opening of this opera. Yeah, I think Massenet got it right, don't you? Maybe it doesn't match exactly what you had in mind, but you can't deny that the music is fast, happy, up, dancy, whirling, bustling, all those descriptive words I used before, and probably your words too. It's a great way to open an opera, by the way. That music really gets your attention as an audience. It grabs you and demands your attention, right? Right. Well, let's look at another moment in this first scene. Quixote, his horse Rocinante, and Sancho arrive in the middle of this fiesta, and they're noticed, of course, by the villagers, who take one look at this old man like he's a little crazy, but he's a harmless eccentric. His character is established right away, and we see him notice Dulcinea as he begins this growing attachment to her. He decides to sing her, this is opera, of course, a serenade. A serenade is a love song that's sung by a lover to his beloved at night, a kind of sung valentine. At this point in the scene, the crowd has gone away, everybody's gone to bed. Quixote and Sancho are left on the town plaza alone. Here's what the stage directions say. Night falls gently, blue and serene. Don Quixote, lost in thought below Dulcinea's balcony, breaks the silence with his mandolin. So, what does the music have to describe? Well, the appearance of evening, but not just darkness. It needs to be blue and serene. Now, how do you write music that's blue and serene? Can you make music into a certain color? Well, no. But we know what nighttime feels like in the summer when there's a full moon and you can still see the color of the sky, especially out in the desert where it's calm and quiet with no street lights around to take away from the atmosphere. Our composer Massenet describes this with 4 simple chords played by the orchestra. Listen. Simple, direct, to the point, with a very small amount of effort, Massenet has described the time and day and the feel of night. Then he gives us something else. Remember the stage directions? They refer to an instrument that Quixote already has in his hands. Remember what it was? The mandolin. A mandolin is a kind of small guitar, easy to carry around with a shoulder strap, and it's something that Quixote always carried with him, ready on a moment's notice to sing a beautiful romantic serenade to a princess. He takes it in hand and he begins to play. Well, that's a great clue for the composer, isn't it? He must have the orchestra imitate the sound of the mandolin in order to accompany Quixote's song to Dulcinea. And this is what Massenet came up with. It sounds like a harp or a guitar or a mandolin being strummed by the hand of a man in love, right? Quiet, intimate, fresh, all the things that you'd want a serenade to sound like. And then we get the tune. Quixote sings this beautiful melody. With that mandolin accompaniment and the tune, this is what you get. Isn't that beautiful? What princess, what woman wouldn't respond to this gorgeous melody played and sung by a knight in shining armor under her balcony, especially as written by Massenet, with this wonderful perfumed sense of romance and mystery at night. That all comes through in the music, perfectly written to describe the scene and to communicate what's going on in the story on stage at this very moment. That's how music works in opera. And every opera, that's the thing about it that I love, that the music can communicate such specific and beautiful things. My friend Don Quixote and I invite you to see Don Quixote, a very French opera about a very Spanish character. I know you're going to enjoy it. We'll both see you at the opera.